There we go. And this time I'm on more channels, but I don't think that Jason can join me today, which is unfortunate. I don't know who can. Um, I don't know whether these live streams that I'm doing where I don't get interaction and which are not necessarily very interesting, I don't know where they go. If they have to sort of exist in perpetuity as eternal marks of my shame and inability to draw a crowd, or if they can just be mercifully deleted. So we've got one person, Teo Falai. Hello, Teo. I'm searching my mind to find out what kind of name Teo is. Tayo Falai. The last name should be a clue. You can help me by telling me what kind of name you have. I love to find out the origin of names. The philosopher Saul Aaron Kripke said that the essence of an individual is. So I suppose a name doesn't really quite get to that level of essentiality, but still there's a lot in a name. You can always Google, but that's cheating. All right. Yeah, I don't know what people do on this live stream, whether they just wait for people silently or whether they try to fill up the dead air like some kind of radio host. Don't necessarily know how much time I have. Oh, okay, Ghana. Oh, three options. All right. Okay. So Ghana and Nigeria, let me think about that because I don't know. Ghana is West Africa. Nigeria is it's not East Africa, but it's not as far west, if I'm not mistaken. It's kind of more so middle, but I'm not sure. I need to look at a map. Yeah, I doubt that it's Swedish. So Teo Falai. So that's either Ghana or Nigeria. And I'm going to guess. I really don't have a principle. It doesn't sound like the Nigerian names that I know. So for that reason, I'm going to guess Ghana. That's my final answer. Cue the suspenseful music. Now I got to post the link to YouTube. The link to what? Andrew, turn it. I have to post the link to YouTube. Andrew, if you could elaborate, I would appreciate it because I'm something of a technological ignoramus. Oh, he's Nigerian. There you go. See, I just lost however many dollars. That's pretty shameful. Hello, Teo. Tayo. I'm not sure the pronunciation. It's a StreamYard. Oh, okay. Hold on. So where do I find the link, Andrew, so that I can post it? This is the link? Okay. I have to post it to YouTube. How does one post the link to YouTube? Can I add him to stream? Hello.
Hi, you all right?
Yes, I'm doing good. How about you?
I am doing fantastic. I've been on the other side of being the first time running a stream, and I thought I'd come in and there's Andrew.
Thank you.
How's
Yes.
it going, man?
All right. What's up? I've seen you before. How are you doing?
Good, you?
Doing all right. Don't know how much time I necessarily have right now. But you guys seem like you're regulars on Jacob's channel.
Mm-hmm.
So what do y'all do? Do y'all just talk you talk theology and politics or
Anything.
anything? Yeah.
Just chatting.
just chatting.
Mhm.
Yeah. The sort of the restless young men of the world who feel the
I
need
don't
to
believe is it how do I pronounce your name? Kalia?
You
Kalia.
can. You know, the pronunciation of my name is something of a. It's ultimately sort of indeterminate because the correct pronunciation is Kalia. The modern Indian pronunciation is Kalia, so that's also correct. My parents say Kalia, which is technically incorrect, but there's another way that your parents can't really be wrong about the pronunciation of your name because they're the ones who decide it. And so growing up, I was Kalia Rivet. These days, I've introduced myself as Cal Rivet because I'm a speech therapist and my people have a hard time with hard names. So I try to make my name kind of as simple as possible. But yeah, pretty much any pronunciation is correct. What about yourself? I don't know how to pronounce your name.
It's one of two ways, Teo or Tayo. Either one's good with me.
Taya.
People
What
in
is the
this
way
corner,
that your parents use?
Tayo,
Tayo.
Tayo for the
Yeah,
most part.
they're
I've got
presumably correct.
members that are called.
I'm sorry, you broke
I
up.
mean, similarly to yours. Oh, yeah, my connection isn't great. But similarly to your name that you shorten to Cal to help people pronounce it better, I've shortened Temitayo to Tayo or Teo.
Got it. Oh, okay. That's really interesting. Yeah. And so, are you from Nigeria or just your family?
I was born and raised in Nigeria.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Where Lagos or where at?
I was born in Lagos, but I grew up in a city further south of Lagos, Oyo, Ibadan, more specifically.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
southwest, I think. Yourself? Don't believe we've met.
Well,
So,
I
what's
was I
your
was
origin
born
story?
in yeah I was born in Hawaii, and basically raised in Texas, and Texas is where I am now.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know why it was that mission trip, military parents? What's the
Yeah, military parents is the most logical guess, but it's not actually correct. My father he is French Canadian, and he became a Hare Krishna in his late teens. When he was in his 30s, he met my mother in Hawaii, and my mother is, I mean, a native Hawaiian in the sense of having been born there, and ultimately also in the sense of having Polynesian ancestry, just very little. Mostly Portuguese on that side. And so they met in Hawaii, and I was born there, but then I was raised in Texas. So
noise? And when and how did you discover this messy corner of the internet?
yeah, probably. How early? I mean, how early was I on Discord? Not super early. I haven't been on for a very long time. Maybe just the past 3 years. So the Bridges of Meaning server was started kind of with Jordan Peterson, and I was watching that for a long time. I knew who Paul Vanderklay was, but I didn't get on the Bridges of Meaning server until I found Luke Thompson broadcasting on the Bridges of Meaning or the Randos United channel. And then I reached out to him because I wanted to talk to him, and that's how I got onto the server. So I was always aware of like the sort of Jordan Peterson phenomenon, and also I knew who Paul Vanderklay was, but I wasn't really on the server until I don't know, like 3 years ago.
What was it that you wanted to speak to Luke about?
What was it? Well, I heard him talking about basically Christian universalism or universal salvation in Christianity, and that was where I was really strongly. It was something I was really strongly oriented toward at the time, and still am. And I thought there was an interesting amount of similarity and also difference between his views and mine, and that really he was arriving at a lot of the same ideas but from a much more intuitive and holistic place, and I was being led in the same direction along similar lines, but through a different sort of process or temperament. Like in theology you have basically two impulses or strands. You have classical theism, which is basically carrying a lot of the ancient wisdom that there is on God, and it overlaps in many traditions. It tends to be very apophatic. It tends to be very negative. It talks about a very transcendent conception of God that is better known through what God is not than through any kind of attempt to positively enumerate his attributes. And then there is your other kind of theism, which is, they call it analytic theism, and it's kind of like analytic philosophy but taken in a theological direction. And I mean, it to some degree it deserves its reputation as being a little bit reductive and kind of silly, and there's a lot of fun one can make of the analytic theists, but I kind of like it. And then it's sort of related strand or impulse of process theism. I like them because they get more explicit, and they attempt to be more rigorous and as regards theological questions and definitions. And they also there's like a greater attempt at clarity of thinking, and they don't just punt to mystery on various issues or questions. And I think that it's much more illuminating to at least try to enter into a mystery and fail to talk about it accurately than it is to or with maximal accuracy than it is to just say it's a mystery and leave it at that.
Yeah,
But yeah.
I wouldn't imagine those sorts of conversations are one that you can bring up at your local church Bible study.
Yeah, well, I am to the extent that I attend a local church, it's a Catholic church, and no, you're
Is
right
it,
about that.
what's the because I'm very much Protestant, always have been, but
Yeah,
spending time in this little corner has sort of started more ecumenical conversations that I find very interesting. What's the
yeah.
Catholic position on universalism?
That dogmatic or certain universalism is clearly incompatible with Catholic teaching. So, in other words, the idea that all are certainly saved, or that we can know that all are saved, that is clearly incompatible with Catholic teaching. And the idea that we can hope for the salvation of all is, I think a lot of people would tell you that that is an allowable Catholic position. Some would tell you that it is not. So I would say probably it's more accurate to say that whether that position is allowed, whether we can hope in principle for the salvation of all, that is it's sort of debatable whether that's really allowed or not. But a lot of people will say that it is. I mean, there's a Bishop Barron, who says that I mean, that's his view, and it's basically started by a fairly influential Catholic theologian named Hans Urs von Balthasar, but sort of a modern theologian. So yeah. And yourself, may I ask what kind of Protestant you are? Because it's Chad. What's up, Chad? What kind of Protestant are you? Because I know that makes a great deal of difference. Sort of
Uh,
Reformed versus.
yeah, uh, it's um I think the best sort of frame for it would be Pentecostal, because I've always been
Mm,
in Pentecostal circles. So
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I've been in all different sort of denominations under the Protestant umbrella, but it's always been Pentecostal. There's always been an emphasis on gift of the Spirit, even though I don't speak in tongues. But that's
Yeah.
the circles I spend time in.
Do you know Derek Prince?
I don't believe I do, but I'm also terrible with names, so might have come across
Okay.
him.
Well, Derek Prince is I mean he's passed on now, but he's a kind of he was a British evangelical who got saved in the British Army in World War II in North Africa, and he was deeply charismatic and moved to America, and his teaching, you know, he was in training to be a philosopher. I think he already had a professorship, or he was either on the tenure track as a professor, or he was on the the way to becoming a professor at Cambridge or Oxford or somewhere like that. And he ended up becoming like a Pentecostal or charismatic minister in America. And but his teaching is very he speaks and thinks like a philosopher, which is highly interesting because on the one hand, it's sort of
Fascinating.
it is fascinating because it's almost the last sort of temperament or cognitive style that you would expect to be associated with charismatic
Charismatic.
Christianity. But actually, personally speaking, you know, I've attended. Well, I've gone to Protestant charismatic functions and gatherings, and I've also attend Catholic ones because that's actually also where my theological inclinations run as well. I don't see. I mean, I think that if one takes the Bible very seriously, it's hard to imagine that the gifts of the Spirit can have ever or should have ever ceased. I think,
Yeah.
and I think that the obvious truth is that they continue. But you know, you talk about things like prophecy, for example. That's very interesting. I happen to think that the nature of reality is such that it's a little bit like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. To observe a phenomenon is to change it, and to make a prophecy is to open up the possibility of things not that prophecy not coming true, but only because people hear and heed the prophecy. For example, like in the book of Jonah, where the prophecy is not, if you listen, then your city will be saved. The prophecy is simply, your city is going to be destroyed. And then in hearing that, they don't just fatalistically, you know, lie down and await destruction. They repent in sackcloth and ashes, and the city is saved, which means the prophecy was false, where prophecy is understood as a prediction. But really, the more biblical way of understanding it is just speaking sort of as the mouthpiece of God. And I tend to think that the restriction, the definition of prophecy is restricted in that way because the nature of reality itself is such that you can't make a prediction without opening up the possibility of reality differing from the predicted outcome, if only because the prediction was given.
It's so interesting you brought up prophecy because that was I grew up with my uncle and auntie, and my uncle was an elder, my auntie was a prophet. She would regularly prophesy in our the liturgy was such that there's a space given for words of prophecy should they come, and if they do come, it's noted down. And if they don't, you move past that part of liturgy. And my auntie was one of the in my church growing up, one of the prophets that regularly just. And as a kid, as a young child, I found that so cool. I thought it was the coolest thing because it always starts with "Thus saith the Lord," and then once someone somewhere in the congregation says "Thus saith the Lord," there's like a quiet that just comes over and everyone's just intensely listening. But I think from my memory, which I was a child, but from my memory, most of the prophecies are often affirming scripture, like just either praying a blessing that can also be found in Psalms or something of such that that's just sort of helping to galvanize the church. But there's also in the denomination that was it, the Apostolic Church. It's a Nigerian denomination. Every year there's a prophecy that you're expecting to be given for the year, and the prophecy will include a verse from scripture that will be the motto that will be part of the liturgy for the rest of the year. So it's the prophecy was played a liturgical role, and I don't think I've been in any other church since that one from my childhood that put such a huge emphasis on prophecy.
Okay, that's really interesting. The prophecy and words of knowledge. Like when I was at a particular Protestant church, as I'm still technically not Catholic, because
Have you not been
Hmm?
Have you not gone through the process of being?
I've not received the sacrament of confirmation, and I can't receive it until I'm sort of married, until I am married, until I have the sacrament of marriage with my fiance, with whom I already had a child, basically, before I was Catholic or even really Christian, or before I was leaning Catholic. And my understanding is, in some sense, I'm not Catholic until I'm confirmed, and I won't be confirmed until I'm married. I won't be married until I have the money. But I have a date set. I just hope the money will be there.
Congrats on your engagement.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. When I was up in I was up at this Protestant church that I heard they do healing and deliverance pretty much on demand for no money. That was John G. Lake Ministries in Plano, Texas. And I was up there, and I wasn't healed in the way that I wanted to be, but there was someone who had a word of knowledge for me quite unexpectedly at the end, just when I was leaving, and it was accurate, which was very interesting. And that was a person whom he came up to me out of the blue, saying that he had a word of knowledge for me. That was very interesting. Prophecy. What do they say in the Old Testament? If someone claims to be a prophet and their prophecy doesn't come to pass, they let them be put to death. And then you see some of the major prophets of the Hebrew Bible, some of their predictions go awry. I can't think of or prophecies go awry, and I can't think of specifics right now. I think it may be Daniel is one of them. But Jesus himself really clearly appears to be saying that the end times, the end of history is going to come in his lifetime, in the lifetime of the generation of his, of those who are hearing him. And that's why a lot of the modern critical scholarship sees Jesus as a failed apocalyptic prophet, and possibly, or maybe there's something sort of open-ended and generative about the nature of reality itself. It's not like this static, infinite block where everything that's going to happen already exists, and it can't be, the future cannot be changed or reverted. Everything has to run on some fixed course that it can't be deviated from. Some people have that kind of super deterministic understanding of how reality works. I don't think that kind of view is ultimately coherent or philosophically workable. But at the same time, I think that the former view, i.e. not my view, but the other view, that is the view that you really find assumed in Catholic theology. And so for that reason, on a technical level, or the level of strict accuracy, I don't have a lot of use for kind of traditional Catholic metaphysics that the traditional Catholics are still really fond of, like the metaphysics of Thomas Aquinas. I think it's too static, deterministic,
Really?
sort of object-oriented, not factoring in sort of relativity, perception, consciousness, all the all the funky stuff that the 20th century showed us is more than a sort of passing illusion.
Yeah, but from my understanding of all of those funky stuff that you referred to, we still have almost no idea what consciousness is. They're still being understood. And
Well,
it's
not
not
in
like
a
we've got a grasp on most of these things.
well, we don't understand what consciousness is from a material point of view, but that's kind of assuming that whatever consciousness is, it should reduce to a fundamentally material phenomenon. Let's see. Let me just quit. We wrong says, by repenting, they destroyed the part of the city that was to be destroyed. I can see why someone would have that interpretation. That seems to be a workable interpretation. Chad, can't wait to pick this up and listen later. God bless you too, Chad. Hezi, Shalom, Cal, and Tayo. I hope you both have been enjoying your weekend. What I guess today is the Sabbath, right? Can I? Yeah. Would I say Shabbat Shalom? Happy Sabbath.
Shalom is.
True. So, what I was going to say was, yeah, consciousness certainly has evaded understanding from a materialist point of view, but that's just sort of begging the question whether we should be trying to understand it that way. I think increasingly philosophers and scientists in the 21st century are coming to increasingly favor views where consciousness is fundamental and matter reduces to consciousness, not really vice versa. At the very least, one can sort of envision a dialectical dance between idealism and realism. But it seems like consciousness is a necessary condition of something being apprehended by consciousness appears increasingly to be a sort of necessary condition of its existence, if not by itself like a necessary and sufficient condition. Like there is, I would say, some interplay between like the mind and then a kind of non-mind, like material reality. But there's a weird way where these two are just interdefined. Like the mind is almost understood in definitional distinction to matter and vice versa, the way that they sort of presuppose each other, but you're not really going to be able to just subtract out mind and arrive at a picture of ultimate truth. Yeah, no, so I mean, what's really interesting about consciousness, I would say, is that the way that in the 20th century, the materialists almost had a right, at least from a certain limited perspective, to expect that it would reduce to a material phenomenon because of the way that, you know, the brain and consciousness appear to be really lawfully related. You know, if you damage like this really tiny specific area of the brain, a person loses the ability to understand certain concepts, or even if you just temporarily interfere with activity in a certain part of the brain, like a person, they can't recognize shapes anymore, or these aren't really specific examples, but examples like this are easy to find.
Yeah.
And I think the real kind of it's you know, the really strong challenge to the scientific attempt to reduce consciousness to neurology, the strong empirical challenge. There's been philosophical challenges, but the really interesting phenomenon from my point of view is the near-death experiences that are amply attested, and they involve, you know, people having very deep, rich experiences, which they describe as realer than real for you know, what in our time is hours on end. In their time, in terms of the experience, they seem to last years and years. You know, people say that it was like over 40 years I was in that place, that time out of time, and the experience was realer than anything I had experienced up to that. And you say that I had that experience, you know, while I was brain dead for 6 hours or something like that, because some of these people are gone for they're medically dead for periods of time beyond which resuscitation, just, how is that possible? But these people will wake up in, not quite in the morgue, but in like a refrigerated you know, holding cell on where their body is en route to the morgue. Like is stuff that doesn't really make sense. But then again, it's not new. It's just because nowadays we're better able to capture and record these things, or at least people's testimonies. But as early as Plato, you have accounts of like like an Armenian soldier who got up from the battlefield strewn with corpses, talking about how he had an experience of the other side, that was basically all about, and they're nearly all about this, about the all-consuming importance of love and relationships. So it's not really a new phenomenon, but it's very, very hard to
I
make sense
remember,
of. And yeah.
I remember as a kid, just going off what you said. There's an album that I've been trying to find and locate for like the last 10 years. It's this gospel singer in Nigeria that he passed away. He famously passed away, and it was a big news. And then I think a few weeks later, it was announced that this person's no, they're not dead. They've got an album coming out. And on this album, I remember listening to it multiple times. He spoke about the experience of being of the other side, and I
Mm.
think the main thing was he was told that he needed. There was a lot of talk about love, like he also just said, and he was told specifically that he needed to have his Bible with him, but like that he's gonna come back, but he should bring his Bible with him. And I remember he passed away not so long after the album came out, and it was a very it was a trippy sort of album, because this
Yeah.
is someone talking about what it was like to be dead, sort of, and the
Yeah.
conversations that he had while he was dead. And I'm still trying to look at the album to this day.
Well, that's Paul in the New Testament too. He quote unquote knows someone. It's probably himself, who went up to the third heaven. Whether he was in the body or out of the body, he doesn't know. He said that the things that he heard there were, it's like he can't. What did he say? I don't remember, but it's like he can't speak about them, almost on pain of death. It's too holy. Um, that is, I mean, that's fascinating. The thing about it is the earlier efforts to understand consciousness as a naturalistic phenomenon use language like emergence and supervenience. And the funny thing about these words, emergence and supervenience, is that they're very ambiguous, because the original meaning of emergence, an emergent phenomenon, was precisely one that cannot to whatever lower level of material reality that it nonetheless seems to possess a causal relationship with. So, in other words, the original sense of originally in the sense of emergent, if you said consciousness is a phenomenon that emerges from the neurology of the brain, what you meant was consciousness has a kind of causal relationship with neurology, but it can't be fully explained in terms of neurological facts. But then kind of later, you have almost the opposite usage, where what it means for it to emerge is for it almost to be nothing over and above certain neurological facts that one could entertain. I don't think is as fashionable a hypothesis anymore, but maybe there was a time when philosophers of mind could and scientists, cognitive scientists, could entertain the idea that consciousness really was identical, or ontologically the same as the workings of the brain. And again, it's not a totally stupid hypothesis, because of the way that it under experimental conditions the two appear so closely related. It's just that it also appears to be the case that really what I would say, the explanatory framework that makes more sense, is to say that there are levels of reality, and what we're seeing is in some sense only the tip of the iceberg. That the material level of reality is a real level of reality that exerts causal influence. But it's not the final or ultimate reality, such that consciousness does not ultimately depend on these things, even though, as a matter of material observation, we may, at least for a time, observe a causal relationship, even a causal dependence, because it's not the case that every time someone is unconscious, they report an experience of the other side. A lot of the time people are unconscious and it's like, yeah, I don't remember anything from that time, right? But nonetheless,
Just going off what you just said really quickly, it's something
yeah,
I've been wrestling with. It's, does the material level of reality, as the scientific endeavor proving that that's the most powerful um, reality for man because it's the most graspable, and is that why we're so become a slave to it to an extent, to that
yeah.
one.
Well, the old saw about that is it's a sort of methodological error akin to a man who's lost his keys on a dark street, looking for them under the street lamp, and when asked why he's looking for his keys there after not seeming to find them for quite some time, he says, I'm looking for them because this is the only place that has the light. This is the only place that I could find them. But it doesn't rule out the possibility that they're lost somewhere that isn't bathed in light. And so it's kind of it's I don't know what you would call it. It's a confirmation bias of sorts. It's just a hope at the end of the day, a kind of inarticulate hope that everything will be sort of experimentally provable and verifiable, because that's just what gives me the most sort of epistemic power and leverage. But that it's not necessarily just hoping it or wishing it doesn't make it so.
Yeah, I think there is, without a doubt, that confirmation bias of just this is the time we happen to live in. But also, I think there is, I think it would be naive to not give credit to the devil to an extent, in the sense to recognize just that I've been trying to recognize the immense power that the material or scientific materialistic frame does have, and I think the best I can come up with is it's the best we can get to playing God in a real causal way that affects others, in the way that we can grasp it for this power that we know we shouldn't have access to. I mean, I'm going to watch Oppenheimer tomorrow, so that's kind of on my mind as well. So we're grasping for this power that we know not to play with, but because we can, we do it anyway. And I think I think I'm just trying to give the devil its due.
Yeah, well, the devil is certainly due his due. He's smart enough that if he doesn't catch you with one deception, he's going to catch you with the other. And so, because basically, truth is so often sort of dialectical, not merely a via media, not merely the middle way between two extremes, but often simultaneously on both extremes at once somehow. And the devil, what he likes to do is have some impossible exaggeration of something that's by itself slightly true, and you see that, oh, no, there's no way that can be, and then in sort of a reaction or a corrective, you go too far to the other extreme, and that's the lie where he gets you. So it's like Rudolf Steiner, sort of a maybe new agey guy, for lack of a better term, talked about the Ahrimanic deception and the Luciferian deception. The Ahrimanic deception says that there is no spiritual reality. Material reality is all that there is. That's a mistake. And then the Luciferian deception is basically the deception of Gnosticism or the New Age, where in effect you are your own God, or you are God, and that sort of spiritually speaking, the world is your oyster. You just you take whatever practices seem good to you, and you gain power with them. It's fundamentally a matter of working on the self, meditation, or some other discipline. Tarot, divination, it doesn't really matter. And that's the way you go about it. You go about basically empowering yourself, and that almost appears to be the sort of sin that our first parents committed when they ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, knowing that, as the serpent told them, they would become like gods, knowing good and evil. It's like sort of the justification or the creation of the self through the acquisition of usable knowledge of things that are really beyond the sphere of influence or authority that is properly yours. Um, and So the devil, if he doesn't get you with one, he's going to try and get you with the other. And even in Christian theology, there's going to be that danger. For example, if you have things like Bethel Church, where there's just a little bit too much focus on spiritual practices, or there's even in its worst forms or impulses, there is a claim that Christians need to go and sort of appropriate supernatural practices like divination, tarot, things like that, and have Christian tarot, things like that. One imagines that there's room for the devil to work there, because he can always, he's working on every level. Even in churches with sound doctrine, he's twisting doctrine.
Still cool though.
Yeah, well, sure. And it might be that sometimes I'm his instrument, maybe sometimes you are. That's because God knows that I'm all into speculative theology. I bracket it by saying that it's speculative, but I personally found the kind of the overlap between philosophy and theology, just philosophical theology, to be sort of an irresistible area of intellectual investigation. I was first subject to the Ahrimanic error because I was a materialist amateur philosopher of sorts. I'm not a trained philosopher. I don't have those qualifications, but I've always been an amateur philosopher, and for 12 years at least, between ages 16 and 28, I was a materialist. Jordan Peterson and that phenomenon did something to prepare the way in my mind for me to come out of that illusion. But now there's the only other possible illusion is that spiritual reality is somehow other than it really is. And again, one knows that it's quite hard to actually achieve theological accuracy, because, like I said, there's a way that the truth has, especially truths about God, where he's simultaneously immanent and transcendent. The truth has a way of being not just in between two extremes, like some Aristotelian, via media. It's on both extremes at once somehow, in a way that is truly baffling. It's easy to be wrong, but the question is whether your errors are such as can have negative spiritual consequences in your walk with God. And let me see, Jacob is here, but he's muted, but now he's not.
Jacob is not here.
Oh, Jacob is okay. Jacob,
I came on to make sure everything's fine from the background.
Yeah, well, when it's the Sabbath, that's when the Goyim come out to play.
Exactly.
Yes. and spread our heresy on otherwise kosher channels.
It's okay. You're not a Trinitarian, are you?
I can't deny that I am.
You're a Trinitarian.
That's gonna
be
a
Zionist, are you?
A what?
Zionist.
That's an interesting question. How to put it. I'm not anti. It's very succinctly, here's what it is. I would never wish for the state of Israel to be dismantled against the will of the people who currently live there. That said, I'm not really what you'd call a Zionist.
So there's one of the two forms of idolatry that are forbidden on my channel. One is Trinitarianism, the other is Zionism. So you're exactly as bad as Chezi. So don't worry about it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just I got one. Yeah. Well, it's just obviously the subject of Israel is a subject on which one could easily sort of get oneself canceled, crucified, whatever predicate adjective you
Not
want
on
to
this
insert
channel.
there.
Just to clarify, by Zionism, I mean ascribing religious significance to the political state of Israel.
Yeah.
I think that's just plain idolatry.
Yeah, there's like kind of, see, that's what I'm talking about. Like there's two extremes that you don't want to go to either one of them. You don't want to be like the dispensationalist kind of Protestant, but you don't want to be the kind that's like, well, it's totally superseded, and like, it's Israel is totally superseded by the church in scripture.
Oh, well, okay, now you're talking about supersessionism. I should probably pull up my diagram. You guys talk amongst yourselves. I'll see if I can find my diagram.
Well, yeah, no, it's very interesting. I was thinking about it just the other day, actually. I was thinking about how it's not really either or regarding the way that God loves Israel and has elected Israel. There's a certain way that God loves the Jewish people for no higher purpose. In other words, he just loves the Jewish people in and of themselves. He doesn't love them instrumentally. The way that all love is ultimately is sort of autotelic, or it's just intrinsically an end in itself. Now, at the same time, though, God also loves every non-Jewish people, at least if you ask me. And there's a way that he loves. He elected the Jewish people, Israel, as in order for them to be a light to the Gentiles. So it's actually both. That really he loves all peoples intrinsically, the way that a parent loves all their children intrinsically. Like, it's not really, in Catholic theology you see this, like a kind of rank ordering of like, God loves this person more and this person more than that and this person even more. And I don't think it works like that. I think it's like a parent, God sees each of his children at the top of his or her own hierarchy, so that they're not really commensurable or comparable at the end of the day. They're all uniquely valuable in his eyes, and infinitely so in the case of each person and people.
So the Bible says, Beni Bechori Israel, my firstborn son is Israel. And so that's how I interpret it. And we do refer to Ahava Yetera, an extra measure of love, which God has had for us, which is obviously unearned, that comes from descending from the people who were the first prophets, etc. But that's how we view it. So this is my handy dandy Venn diagram for anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, and supersessionism. So anti-Judaism is a rejection of Judaism as a religion. And I don't think you can be not a Jew and not in some form be anti-Judaism. There's nothing wrong with being Christian and being anti-Judaism. So the example I gave is, if you understand Moses, then you believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Obviously, in Judaism, we don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. But like, that's an okay Christian belief to have. That's not a Jewish belief. Anti-Semitism is a belief that the people who are the Jews historically are uniquely cursed or hated by God. So the example I have there is, a Jew will never become a true Christian. It is against their nature, right? And you see that, for example, during the Inquisition. People who were of Jewish descent were persecuted, even though they had converted to Christianity, because people were like, these are Jews. They're never going to be Christians. Yeah. And then there's supersessionism, which is a theological, I would say, mistake, which unfortunately I would say most of Christianity has taught for thousands of years. There is a difference between soft supersessionism and hard supersessionism. And when people talk about supersessionism, they usually mean hard supersessionism, which a lot of Christians do believe, but has been rejected by basically everybody, including the Vatican rejected it in the Second Vatican Council. It's a hard supersessionism. And most Protestants recognize it's absolutely irreconcilable with Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11, because Paul pretty much just like slams hard supersessionism right there. And Father Stephen would like me to believe that the Eastern Orthodox also reject hard supersessionism. Like I tell him, I hope he's right and nobody burns him at the stake for his Judaizing. But if
they're probably
does, God should in fact count him as a martyr.
Well, they're probably not monolithic in the way that the Catholic Church is.
Yeah, and even the Catholic Church. I mean, part of the problem that the Society of St. Pius X had with Judaism was their thing. So the way I put that is the Bible's promises to Abraham always referred to the church, and that's clearly not reconcilable with Romans 10, I don't think. And then you have overlaps. So something can be anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, such as Christianity is a Jewish plot to enslave Gentiles.
Right.
Now, surprisingly, the neo-pagan movement and lots of conspiracy theorists on the internet actually do believe this. They're anti-Christian as well.
For sure.
Yeah. And then you can have anti-Semitism that's supersessionist. Jews were rejected by Jesus because they are uniquely evil, right? So the people who quote, you are of your father, the devil, and say that the Jews are the synagogue of Satan and stuff like that. And then you can have anti-Judaism that's supersessionist. The law of Moses was for children, not adults. That's one way some people do interpret Paul referring to the law. And then you can have something that's all three of them, which this is actually kind of a paraphrase of Justin Martyr. Circumcision was given to mark Satan's own forever. And Justin Martyr, is Justin Martyr.
I mean, right from the beginning, you have a kind of, I don't know, I would say sort of either or-ism in Christianity that kind of belies the fundamentally inclusive nature of the God in whom they, purportedly believe. There's a couple things you said I want to respond to, starting with the first thing you said, that the Jewish people, as God's firstborn, they have an extra measure of love. I want to explain my own kind of unique position on that. I would affirm that. I think they have an extra measure of love, but I also think that every other people also has an extra measure of love, which is going to sound strange, but it's saying like everyone is God's favorite in a sense. And where I'm looking at that specifically in terms of, or what I'm looking at it in terms of, is a work called De Visione Dei, The Vision of God by Nicholas of Cusa. The title is intentionally like, is it God's vision of you or is it your vision of God? The answer being yes. God sees each person as if they were the only person, but somehow he sees every person in such a way simultaneously, which is a paradox that only sort of God can get away with.
You sound like a Trinitarian.
Yeah. Well, I think that at the bottom of logic, you find there's a sort of way that logic necessarily in the end has to be relativized to contradiction, and that at the bottom of logic, at the bottom of the principle of non-contradiction, you find, in a sense, contradiction. You find the absolute. You find both X and not X, and there's a way that an unprincipled exception to logic looks like a contradiction in sort of the macro world of finite perceptions, but in other words, that's not allowed. But there's another sense in which there's a principled exception at the bottom, which is ultimate reality itself, a kind of self-resolving paradox, a burning bush. Even I am becoming, or I will become what I will become. I'm
I
trying
usually
to.
translate it as "I am becoming."
I am
Because
becoming
it's,
what I am
yeah,
becoming.
it is continuous. I
So
mean,
Jacob,
I have
before
to
you
reject
carry
that.
on,
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
before you carry on, Jacob, I've been told that there's a rule on this channel that if your camera is not on, you can't be on stream.
Yeah, but guess what? It's the Sabbath, and I just came from a very long walk, and I'm really sweaty in my undershirt. And unlike you, I don't strut my my beautiful bare chest to the internet.
Touche. But also on that note, I'm gonna say goodbye. Thanks. Lovely chatting to you, Carl. Jacob.
Oh, I'll see you later, Tayo.
Bye, Tayo. I'm gonna put the link here just in case somebody wants to come because I really cannot stay,
Mhm.
and I love the fact that you're streaming.
Yes.
I didn't mean to interrupt the stream.
No, you're fine.
With my stuff. So while I was looking for this meme, I found two other memes that are two of my favorites.
Okay. That is your position. I can recognize it as your position. Islam is the real Christianity. Paul is the Antichrist. The real Jesus was under the authority of the Talmud and deferred to the rabbis, and you should too. Wield spiritual beings aren't real. Sorry, Baz. Oh, bots like Batsani, but Christians flip everything Jesus says on its head. I'm not reading everything, Lord Harry.
Lord Harry is somebody on my Discord.
Oh, yeah. But I know Christianity better than Christians. Well, so I mean that's the thing is there is going to be some truth in that. I read and process things slowly. That's kind of a problem that I have. And it takes me a little while to formulate my thoughts on them. I almost want you to pull that back up so that I can interact with it in depth.
And this might be a good chance for you to learn how to pull it up yourself. So you see there's a bar on the bottom. Yeah. That's a bar everybody has.
Oh, yeah.
So, and in there you can, yeah. Oh, so that bar you just used is the one that lets you shift layouts. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. And yeah, well, I don't see it as well anymore. So this actually is one of the most, and I know you have to go soon, but this is actually one of the reasons why it's really informative for me to talk to you, because you can place a lot of Jesus sayings in a different context than we non-Jews can. And it because I remember we had an earlier discussion about the Peshitta, and I don't think you take the view, unless you do, but I don't think so, that the Gospels were originally written in Aramaic.
I think the Gospel of Matthew was.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And I see other people advance that view too. But I mean, even if it wasn't, there's just the fact that the reported sayings were in Aramaic, and it was in a Jewish culture, and that I mean, when did the Talmud even come to exist? It existed at the time of Jesus, I'm sure.
What I usually say is Talmud is not a book; it's a method. It's a hermeneutic. And so and Yosef agrees with me, when you read Jesus through what I call the crayon, or James Tabor much more beautifully puts the way when you see the pebbles sparkling underneath the river through the Gospels, Jesus is incredibly Talmudic. It's obvious that he has been deeply steeped in the Talmudic method. And to my great shock, some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, most specifically 4Q MMT, very clearly show the influence of the Talmudic method in 4QMMT is probably the oldest document we have, and it's carbon dated to about 100 years before Jesus. So that's as far as the Talmudic method. As far as the Talmud itself, Rabbi Judah the Prince codified, redacted what's called the Mishnah, which is a mnemonic poem that's meant to kind of be something you can recite and in that way rehearse the oral law. And he redacted that around the year 200. What's referred to as the Talmud is a discussion of the Mishnah. And there's the Jerusalem Talmud, which I think dates around the year 300. And then what most people, when they say the Talmud, are referring to is the Babylonian Talmud, which is actually in Aramaic and dates to around I think it was finalized around 500. So when people say Talmud, they usually mean the Babylonian Talmud, that book. But when you talk, so I highly recommend any Christian read what's referred to as Pirkei Avot, which actually
yes,
Chezi,
I've read a little bit of it.
Yeah, Chezi and Ben are going through it on a weekly basis. And I would say clearly the first 3 chapters, possibly the first 4 chapters, and arguably all 6 chapters would be sayings that Jesus would have been familiar with or would have been very common in the rabbinic discussions at the time of Jesus.
Yeah, that's fascinating. When you read something in the Talmud, and for example, like every Jew is a letter in the Torah, does that statement itself, does it have an attribution, like a personal attribution, or is it just in the Talmud and no one knows who in particular said it? It's just an ancient saying.
That particular statement, I don't know. There is a quality that's somewhat comparable to what Muslims have with the Hadith, of trying to trace teachings. And when you look in the Talmud itself, so oftentimes the Talmud, well, sometimes just from the language, I mean, if it's Hebrew or it's Aramaic, you can tell vaguely what time it's from and what period it would be from. The Hebrew sayings are older than the Aramaic sayings. And the Talmud does try to ascribe sayings to various people. And sometimes there's arguments about who things are ascribed to. I'm not sure if Chezi knows that particular saying. I don't remember where that's exactly from. And I mean, there are attempts to distinguish between various. So there are two different eras of rabbis that are referred to in the Talmud. There are the Tanaim, which are the sages of the Mishnah, and the Amoraim, which are the sages of the Talmud or the Gemara. And so oftentimes there's a question of whether this is a Tanaitic statement or it's an Amoraic statement, because the Amoraim, as being from a further generation and further removed from Sinai, are not allowed to be dismissive of the opinions of the previous generation of the Tanaim.
Wow. So yeah, that's obviously highly involved, because it's an attempt to capture so much history in a later written form. Well, I'm not quite sure where I should go from here. I can return to the meme, or you can try to answer Andrew T's question. What linguistic quirks in Matthew point to its having been originally authored in Aramaic, if indeed it was. Like isn't there stuff like Hebraisms, like he set his face toward Jerusalem? That's like you just don't say that in Greek, or what do you?
I know that people have spoken about Hebraisms, but I don't know Greek well enough to be able to really take that into account personally.
Yeah.
What I found to be most conclusive is, well, first of all, that apparently the Ebionites had a Gospel of Matthew that they used, which was slightly different from what we have. And so there is the whole question of the Gospel of the Hebrews and whether that is the original of the Gospel of Matthew or not. But even more than that, there's what's called Shem Tov's Matthew. And what Shem Tov's Matthew is, so there was a rabbi whose name I forget, who wrote a book. It may have been the Abudraham, but he wrote a book, Evan Hashoham, which was a refutation, was a manual for disputations against Christians during the Middle Ages, when forced disputations were kind of a spectator sport among Christians. And he, thank you. I will renew that later. And if you want a Discord link, somebody should be able to get you one, or we'll get you on it later.
My grandmother just came to visit. I'm wondering if I leave, does the stream necessarily end? Also, but also whether it should, because I know that you're going to go.
Yeah, if you're gonna leave and there's no other administrators, you should probably just shut down the stream. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So do you need to go?
I do, because my grandmother's here now.
Okay. So yeah, you know what? I'll just shut down the stream. You can go.
Yeah, we'll just adjourn it. But I'm gonna try to be back on before August.
Okay.
All right. Catch you later.
Okay. Talk to you later.
All right. Take care.